I have to put it in my phone at the time, or it doesn't.
I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Public Works Committee for the City of Rapid City on Tuesday, June 26th. And first order of business is roll call and determination of a quorum. Brenda?
Drew,
Here.
Solomon, Drury, Roberts, Nordstrom. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next up is the adoption of the agenda. If I could get a motion.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion by Drury, second by Nordstrom. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, and the agenda is adopted. Now is a time for general public comment, a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the aldermen present. And I have no forms for general public comment. That general public comment is closed. Now we go on to consent items, and public comment is opened on items 1 through 15, and I have no forms on that. Doesn't look like anybody wants to speak on those items, so we'll close public comment on items 1 through 15. And now we'll go to the members of the committee for any items they want to have pulled. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item number 15, please.
Thank you. Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 14, please.
Thank you, and I would like to pull item number 6. So I need a motion to approve the remainder of the agenda with removal of item 6, 14, and 15.
So moved.
Moved by Drury, second by Nordstrom. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, and the agenda is approved with the exceptions. Okay, we'll go on to item number 6. Authorize staff to advertise for bids for city property fencing project number 17-2396/CIP number 51177. Estimated cost is $80,000. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom. No, okay, no.
That's yours.
It was mine, yes, I saw your name up there, okay. Anyway, I'm going to go to Dale. Dale, I have a question on this. Can you tell me exactly where this is and why we're spending $80,000 on a fence?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This property is city-owned property that was acquired at 2 different times. One of the acquisitions was by our water department many years ago. The city purchased a water right on a property, but as part of that, we obtained the entire property. It's been on the city inventory for quite some time, and then the balance of the property that's going to be fenced was acquired as part of a land swap with the Wally Byam site here 5 or 6 years ago. Both of these parcels weren't fenced. So they have adjacent properties that are active, either farming or ranching. The old saying, good fences make good neighbors, is something that we believe is probably the best thing in the city's interest, to make sure that the city-owned property is well defined as to the limits. And also in the case that we sell these properties in the future, that fence is in place, so that's an expense that a future owner won't have to incur.
Oh, so these might be for sale at some point, so we're protecting our investment? Is that what you're...
Most certainly, yes.
Okay, that was the end of my questions. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Tech, a question for him, please, if I may.
Go ahead.
Dale, just remind me, there was some surveying involved in this, too. Is that correct?
Correct. There was an item that came before City Council a few months ago on the property that I'll call the water property. There was an adjoining property owner that had encroached onto the city property, but on the same token, someone that had leased the city property, I think, had encroached onto the adjoining property with some haying or something of that nature. So there was an agreement made with that adjoining property that we would swap some land acre for acre, And so then this fence will then be erected on that swap line, so there won't be any confusion in the future as to who owns what and who has legal rights to farm or ranch that property.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay, I need a motion. Motion to approve by Solomon, second by Nordstrom. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, and the motion carries. That moves us on to item 14, authorize staff to advertise for bids for Mountain View Cemetery Storage Building, Project PR 18-6165, at an estimated cost of $220,000. And we have Jeff Biegler going to the podium, and the chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I move to approve. If I can get a second and retain the floor.
Second.
Thank you. So what I would like to do is just have Jeff kind of educate the council on what this storage facility is going to do and the purpose of it.
Certainly. This is a steel-sided storage building that will be constructed to house the equipment that they use at the cemetery, tractors, mowers, all of the equipment that currently sits out in the weather. This is an effort to protect the city's investment in that equipment and also provide a safe, dry storage place away from the weather, away from vandalism, all that sort of thing.
So protecting our investments and our
Exactly.
equipment, which can be pretty costly. And
Absolutely, yes.
okay, very good. Thank you, Jeff.
And Jeff, I have just a follow-up question here. So you've experienced vandalism of our equipment on the site?
We have, yes.
To what extent? I mean,
Well, even though the site is fenced, it's not a solid fence, and it's possible to either squeeze through the fence, or there's actually a pedestrian area that you could walk into the cemetery when the gates are closed. And yes, we have had, we're assuming, kids playing around with the equipment when staff is not there, and it has created some damage and some repair costs.
and it's also a safety issue, I would say.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's the end of my questions. Thank you, Mr. Biegler. And seeing no more lights in the queue, the motion is to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, and the motion carries. That takes us on to item 15, approval of the 2019 through the 2022 Rapid City Area Transportation Improvement Program, and this is a draft report. Let's see, who pulled this one? Okay, Richie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, if I may make the motion to approve the 2019 to 22.
Motion by Nordstrom, second by Solomon. Go ahead.
Thank you. If I can call upon Kip Harrington for a couple of things, just to clarify, and it looks like plenty of projects that are going to be taking place here, and a lot of it's coming out of the CIP budget, and it's a good thing. All good things. And the two of them that I'm particularly interested in is the TAP grant that we'll be doing along Campbell Street up to following along Rapid Creek to Omaha. Can you tell the public a little bit about what that project involves and how that came about? Because I was following this grant for some time and glad to see it coming to fruition.
Certainly. Kip Harrington, Long Range Planning. This project that we're referring to is a Transportation Alternatives Program grant through the South Dakota Department of Transportation. It's a competitive grant application process where the city provides a match, and then we get some funding from SDDOT. This project was originally designed to provide pedestrian and bicycle access to Western Dakota Tech out on East Highway 44. The original design of the project was to come up from Rapid Creek along Highway 4 or along Campbell Street, I'm sorry, and then go down the old railroad line, which runs adjacent to Highway 44, and then work its way up through the industrial area towards Western Dakota Tech and cross over Highway 44 at Mickelson Drive at the traffic signal there. However, in the process of trying to get alignments through there, we ran into some issues getting easements and such across some private property. We're not able to complete that. And as that process was ongoing, the South Dakota Department of Transportation came out with a program or a project to construct sidewalk all the way along the north side of Highway 44 from LaCrosse Street all the way out to Covington Street, so providing that access all the way out to Rapid Valley. So then we were able to repurpose those funds and make that connection from the Greenway Path at Rapid Creek all the way up the east side of Campbell Street and across Omaha to tie into that South Dakota Department of Transportation project. So we'll be working on those in conjunction. So that will provide a non-motorized access for those students at Western Dakota Tech, and it will also provide some access from people in Rapid Valley as well to come all the way up Highway 44, come down Campbell, and then get on our Greenway Path and use that throughout the city.
Most excellent. And that'll save the property owners a lot of, shall I say, a lot of money for installation of a sidewalk, because we asked about that area being a sidewalk installation project, and this will save a lot of money for those.
That is correct. This project
Business,
is in
yeah.
the neighborhood of $475,000, I believe. And so, again, a big portion of that comes from the grant funding, and then the city pays a match as part of that.
Thank you, Kip. The other project that I'm interested in is the East Boulevard and East North Street reconstruction from St. Joseph to Herman Street. Can you tell us a little bit about that project? It looks like a good project. I've seen a little bit of the landscaping and some other things that are taking place over in that area. So if you want to share with us what you can tell us about that project.
Well, East North Street has been reconstructed from Herman Street to the east all the way out through Rushmore Crossing, so you can see what the roadway profile should look like as it continues. This will continue that project to the west, around the curve and down the hill to East Boulevard, and then all the way down to St. Joseph Street. So it'll take you past the old Prairie Market building and things like that. It's a full roadway reconstruction with some utility work. I don't have details on the utility work. Perhaps Mr. Tech or Mr. Johnson can provide some of that as far as the details, but there will be just a street reconstruction into a normal urban 5-lane configuration, and there may be a little work done on the boulevard strips and on East Boulevard, if I believe.
Thank you for that report. Looking for lots of big things to happen here within the city. And then your report also includes other areas within the region of the MPO as well. Is
Yeah,
there
that's
anything
correct.
that you would like to highlight?
Well, this document lays out the 4-year construction projects and the associated funding. So it lists all of the South Dakota Department of Transportation projects in the region, City of Rapid City CIP projects, City of Box Elder CIP projects, Meade County and Pennington County Highway projects as well. So this is a 4-year program. This is the draft report. The final will come back in August to this committee as well as the MPO committees. We do expect some probably significant changes in some of the projects based on the Rapid City CIP and also the South Dakota Department of Transportation. After they hold their STIP public meetings here next month, we'll probably have some changes to their project listing as well, but those will all be reflected in the report. We'll additionally add a bunch of language in there for the new MAP 21 highway funding bill that requires the MPO to follow performance measures along with SDDOT, and we're still working out the language to be included in the report there, but there will be a couple additional pages of text, language, and narrative to address those federal requirements in the final report.
Very good, thank you. Could you remind us what MAP 21 stands for?
MAP 21 is the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, and that's the current highway funding bill.
Thank you.
Approved by Congress.
Madam Chair, if I may direct a question to Mr. Tech.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Tech, on the East Boulevard project, we got some construction going on over there with, looks like drainage, stormwater system. Is that involved with this East Boulevard and East, or is that a separate project?
The project that the city currently has under construction near the intersection of East Boulevard and Omaha Street is actually a sanitary sewer trunk main that we are getting ahead of this large project that you mentioned. So it's a way for us to get utilities installed and have that done before the other project takes off. So it speeds up construction of the road project in essence. So that's currently what's happening at that location.
I applaud the staff for looking for efficiencies like this. Thank you very much for that report. Gentlemen, I will yield the floor.
Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a couple follow-ups on other projects on this, and I appreciate you sharing the list and how the funding sources are going to work out. One of them is the project from Sheridan Lake Road from Corral Drive to Catron. Are we looking at widening? Are we looking at turn lanes? Do you kind of have an idea of what we're talking about there?
That corridor is still under study. We're currently working with a consultant in Public Works to come up with some recommendations for that corridor. There have been some preliminary results that have been shared with the city, and the consultant is finalizing those options, and then the report will lay out some different options for that corridor. Widening is certainly a possibility, as well as some additional turn lanes, and there's also some possible reconfiguration of the Sheridan Lake Road and Catron Boulevard intersection.
Speaking of intersections, so the other one that's in the 2021 plan that looks like it's going to happen is the West Main and Jackson Boulevard, that quagmire of an intersection. Are we looking at a complete redesign or just redoing the existing layout there?
I've seen some of the plans. Public Works might be able to speak to that a little bit better, but it will be somewhat of a redesign. There will be the installation of some medians that will help reduce turning movement conflicts in that area. Mr. Tech may be able to give you some more information on that.
Thank you. May I direct?
Of course.
Dale, do you kind of have any idea what we might do with that intersection? It's a mess.
Well, correct.
We know.
It's in essence a three-legged intersection, and it sees a very large volume of traffic. Certainly, the pavement condition there is very poor. It's beyond its service life. We've been working with adjoining property owners to obtain the necessary easements and right-of-way to redo the intersection. It'll look a little different. It should function much differently. Try to reduce some of the cross-turning movements with the installation of medians. There will be supplemental access around the Fisher Furniture Home Gallery building to improve access on the north side of the roadway there. So it'll function much better. It'll look slightly different, but it'll certainly be a huge improvement for all those users that utilize that roadway.
Okay, good. Well, it's just good to know that folks know that these projects are on our radar. We wish they were done today, but they take years of planning, and in some cases, federal matching programs or state funded matching programs in order to complete them. So it's not just us, but it's a lot of entities. So thank you all for your updates.
Motion on the floor is to approve. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? And 15 carries. Okay, this brings us to the end of our consent calendar. We're on to non-consent items. And I have one request to speak. Jim Lentner, would you like to speak now or as the items come up? I know they're your items, but you know I'm going to take them separately. So come on up to the podium and speak now.
Good afternoon. I am Jim Letner. I live at 1204 West Boulevard, and I'm here to talk about my two items on the agenda. Is there a chance that I can get an overhead aerial so that I can try and speak a little bit more clearly and with some and get everybody on the same page? Thanks, Dale. Can I get an aerial of the area as well? Or is that impossible to do?
We have just a bit of a delay here as we get the projection up. We do try to accommodate all people that come to speak before the committee and get them to present themselves in the best light possible. And that, for this case, requires an overhead projection. So we'll have a bit of a delay. Where is it? I know. I just really skimmed it because read it when I'm on the plane. I'm ready for Monday night. It's really good to know because people ask you all the time. Yeah, I'd like to be able to refer to that.
To toggle back and forth, you're going to have to go from document camera to computer.
Okay.
And maybe
I
this
can hit
isn't
the
gonna
button here
happen.
with a pen.
Finger works.
Are you serious? You know, we do have access to a map in our notes, so if they can't get it.
He's nearly there.
I've got it. I just hit computer and it's fine. Start presentation.
I think so. He continued it.
Okay, this is rather complicated, and I'm going to do my best to keep it as simple as possible. The area with a orange square around it is a parcel of land that I purchased. Perfect. Is a parcel of land that I purchased in 2004, previously platted in 1979, and before that, 1963. It was owned by Nash Finch, who subsequently sold a piece of property to Ace Hardware. When I bought this property, East St. Charles Street was not constructed. There was also a drainage problem where drainage from even Omaha and all of this land, impervious, came straight onto this property. The first thing I did when I purchased the property is visit the city to see what it take to develop it and plat it. I'm going to give you a little bit of a timeline on that here. Can you see that? Oops.
Yeah.
I purchased this land in November of 2004. I immediately went and talked to the city even before I had purchased it to get feedback on what it was going to take to either pull a building permit or plat it. I received feedback, and I subsequently submitted a layout plat in January of 2005, 2 months later, and this is what I got back on a staff report. If you can read that, it basically said that improvements to Creek Drive were not going to be necessary at the time of platting. I would have to sign a waiver of right to protest for improvements to Creek Drive. It was basically explained to me that if and when it was an assessment project, the cost of that project would be divvied up between my portion of the cost, the property owners on the adjacent side of the street's cost, as well as the benefit to the general public. I subsequently pulled the plat, but before I did that, there was also am I doing wrong here, Kim?
See your computer. There you go.
There was also an enormous infrastructure issue that I just told you about. I probably had 15 to 20 acres of impervious stormwater running onto this site. I was adjacent to a street that had been platted but never constructed. And in order to plat this property, I needed to deal with those issues. And what I ended up working out with the staff at the time was to construct a massive storm sewer system that handled not only my own waters, but the cities, these adjacent property owners, these streets, that goes from the middle of my property all the way up to Rapid Creek. Now that was included in a TIF. Additionally, I was responsible for constructing East St. Charles Street, which was platted but never constructed. And what we agreed to at that time is that 50% of the cost would go into the TIF, and 50% of the cost would be mine because I was going to be able to use 50% of the street. So I agreed to that. And what I did subsequently over the course of the next 5 years, and I'm putting this up because as I've spoken to some city council members, they wanted to see the numbers that are associated with these improvements that I did to that property so that I'd be able to plat it. I'm going to put a DVD on for you guys. How do I get this? Well, you can see that without the... I was a little weary about putting these numbers up here because, quite frankly, they can be misleading, and if someone wanted to argue with me, they could. But anyhow, I had a couple of city council members ask me for these numbers to represent what I had invested in that property to be able to plat it based on what the staff told me initially when I bought this property 12 years ago. On the left side are the costs are the dollars that I spent to be able to use that property. I had some capitalized interest that went into the TIF because I constructed the storm sewer approximately 5 years before I constructed East St. Charles. What happened is I started building on that site. It immediately became clear to me that there was a major drainage issue. Quite frankly, the whole bike path, east half of that property, was under 2 feet of water more than once. So I ended up having to do the storm sewer immediately. And I didn't do the street, and I was dragging my feet, and things weren't happening very fast, and I actually went back to the city to try and get the street off the TIF. I'm like, look, this thing isn't going to work. And basically the feedback was, well, we want the street, you asked for it, you build it. And I'm like, well, I did. And so I ended up constructing the street. That's the reason we've got those capitalized interest. The other things, I brought utilities into the site so that I could use those utilities for the rest of the site. And I also had to bring an enormous amount of fill just because I put in a 4-foot storm sewer pipe to handle all of the water from all these adjacent areas that I couldn't even get covered with the on-site fill. What's on the left, the bottom number, these are the dollars that are certified and the city accepted as part of the TIF. So of the $722,500, $475,000 went into the TIF. My problem right now is I'm in year 12 of that TIF. I've got 8 years left, and this is approximately what the balance is on the TIF. I come in last year to plat, and now believing that I've got a project or something to move forward with developing that land so that I can get my dollars out of this TIF, I find out the city's not going to do a warp anymore. So now it opens up this entire can of worms of platting adjacent to public right-of-way after I've spent $722,000 to move forward with developing that property. And to try and keep this conversation as simple as possible, I am willing to deal with those items as if I were bringing this in, platting adjacent to public right-of-way. That, in my opinion, is a mess. Dale Tech is willing to have some conversations about it. But on top of all that, I can't move forward with this project because the city, and I'm hoping someone has some sympathy to me, is not recognizing the conversation that I've had with them, the dollars that I spent, and letting me move forward after I spent, dollars putting in a storm sewer system that's. The city didn't pay for the oversized cost of that. I paid for the oversized cost. The notion that I haven't participated in the inadequate infrastructure in that area is just flat out wrong. So, all that being said, I don't know how to move forward. I'm hoping that the city council will say, look, this guy you've taken your pound of flesh from him. He did everything that you asked him to do. Let him plat the property. If we need to go through these other things, and I've sent an email to the city attorneys. I'm not being represented by an attorney. I have spoken to one. I did get some legal advice. I do believe that there's a promissory estoppel issue. In other words, I moved forward in good faith based on what the city told me, and then it changed its position, and it's costing me an enormous amount of money. I also believe, and it's not germane to this particular conversation, that there is a serious issue with platting adjacent to previously dedicated and improved city right-of-way. If we continue on the same path of applying the infrastructure design criteria manual to that situation, there will be problems. You're going to end up with unplatted balances. You're going to end up with people condominiumizing land when they really shouldn't be. You're going to end up with larger parcels of land that if someone buys it and it's not worth the cost of splitting the property, you're just going to have more unused property, as well as the whole notion that the city's requiring someone to improve not only the infrastructure that is adjacent to them, but the infrastructure that's adjacent to the property owners on the other side of the street, as well as the infrastructure that's necessary to serve the public as a whole. I know this thing is a mess, and I know that I rambled on a little bit. I'm happy to answer whatever questions. And
thank you, Jim. Please
do whatever
stand by for questions as we come to these items.
So that moves us on to item number 16, appeal of denied exception request by Jim Letner to waive the requirement to install water main, additional pavement, curb, gutter, sidewalk, handicap ramps, and streetlight conduit along Creek Drive, City File EX068. And this is continued from June 12th at the Public Works meeting. So Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I direct a question to Dale Tech, please?
Yes.
So Dale, listening to Jim and having heard him discuss this, you know, his point, I think it is a valid point for us to consider, is that when he originally platted this, we were under an agreement with him in a sense that, you know, that because we've done away with warps the last couple of years, but he's working under a different presumption because of the staff and situation at the time. So it seems a little unfair, but can you kind of respond to what he just laid out to us, and maybe so that we can kind of make sure we have a balanced perspective so we can make the right decision here?
Well, I guess I'll begin by stating, you know, he talks about he started this back in 2004, 2005. Our platting processes and even designs for things, they expire after 2 years. So to come back in and say, well, I want to follow the same requirements that I had 13 years ago isn't proper. Criteria changes, things change. Could be changes to land use regulations, so on and so forth. So that's why those regulations are in place. However, I mean, that's a valid request of Mr. Lettner, that's what he wants to see, is his original thing honored, I guess, if you will. You know, to speak to the fairness of installing improvements in public right-of-way, yeah, I think there's some issue with that. However, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that I can guide you in providing you any information. I think it's going to take a work group. We met last week with Mr. Lettner and others that he invited, as well as city staff, to discuss, well, perhaps we should take a look at this issue and see if there are other opportunities for not necessarily public participation, but making sure that who benefits pays their fair share. You know, if it's oversizing for the city, have some sort of funding mechanism available for the city to participate. So that's a policy discussion that's going to take months, if not longer, to figure out. So that doesn't do you a lot of good today.
Right.
I guess I don't have an answer other than Creek Drive, it's an old roadway that if there's heavy commercial development that occurs adjacent to it, it's not going to hold up well. So that's certainly staff's concern regarding improvements along Creek Drive.
Thank you. There's a couple of things, you know, to your point that city staff, members of the council, we convened a meeting with other developers to look at these kind of issues long-term, which isn't going to help us today. But when we make an exception, I think we have to make sure it's an exception and not the rule. In this case, as Mr. Lettner has laid this out at previous times, and obviously in the last year he's tried to develop this piece of property, it's understandable to me. I mean, I would understand that. I can also understand that there's got to probably be an expiration on the platting. I mean, that does make sense because things do change. But I think this is a situation where I can support the exception because of the history that is involved and because of the area that's involved there, and because we want to see this kind of infill development. I mean, this is development within a much needed part of Rapid City that could really use a boost from that. And as we talk about issues such as housing and associated quality of life issues that are around that, I think this is a piece of property that can work really well for that. It's near public transportation, and I'm not sure what he's going to do on this property. We haven't asked him, but I think that'll all depend on what we decide before he determines what his next steps are. So I think for right now, I can support this appeal for this exception, but it doesn't mean I would approve every one of them that come along unless they have this kind of, you know, clearly historical facts and data behind it. So interested to see what the rest of the council members think, but I just want to let you know where I'm at. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Mr. Tech, please.
Okay.
Mr. Tech, these exceptions that are being requested here, and there's quite a long list, in my opinion, and I understand why he's coming forward with these requests for the appeal. But can you tell us from the city perspective, or even the CIP budgeting process perspective, if we do not install, we do not allow, let me rephrase that, if we continue on the path to uphold the appeal for the street light, conduit, water main, the sewer, how's that going to affect the rest of the area, including the CIP as well?
Well, I guess the simple answer is someday the city will be reconstructing Creek Drive and will make all the necessary upgrades to it. So currently there is no project identified nor funded for that, but in the future I anticipate there will be, just as eventually it might be 193 years later, but we're going to be rebuilding every street in town eventually. So that's, I guess, where it's at. There's been no commitment made to do anything different on Creek Drive. I guess one thing I should point out is the water main. There should be a loop on Creek Drive to provide adequate fire flows and fire protection for the properties that Mr. Lettner is proposing to plat. We don't know what the uses are going to be precisely on that, but certainly that need for water and fire protection is a very important issue. You know, I think will say that, well, I don't need that water main. Well, technically he doesn't to be able to hook up to it, but just as every other water main in town, somebody else has paid to extend it to the property, and so it's, in my estimation, that property owner's responsibility to extend that water main so the next person has that same availability to it as they did. So I guess hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Nordstrom.
It does, and you anticipated my next question on the water loop going through this area. So if I understand the CIP process working through this, if this loop is not installed in there, that will come out of the utility fund?
It would be the Water Enterprise Fund more than likely.
Water Enterprise Fund.
Yes.
And our reserves, well, I guess we don't know exactly what the reserves will be on the water fund.
Yeah, once again, this is not an identified project. We have not even scoped it as a CIP project for the water fund. It's not on the books or even on the horizon to even consider doing this project. I'm going to yield for the moment, but I think there's some other things that I need to get some clarity on as well. So if I may, I'll yield for the moment.
Chair recognizes Becky Drury.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I ask Mr. Lettner a question?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Lettner. When is the last time you've made improvements to this property?
2010 is when I constructed East St. Charles. I asked for the TIF in 2005. I had 5 years to do the improvements, and 2005 is when I constructed East St. Charles. And if you're asking about the building, the first building I put on was in 2005, 2006. I bought the property intending to develop the entire south half of that property. I was going to construct the same building that I constructed over on the other side. I began the platting process. I didn't know how it was going to play out. I withdrew the plat. You know, I was only given one approach on East St. Pat. I couldn't, East St. Pat, I think, has got a 42-inch sewer main. I mean, it's the big main that goes all the way out to the sewer plant. And I couldn't really get into that sewer, so I had to bring sewer off of Creek Drive. I mean, obviously, I wish I would have gone through with platting the thing, even if I had to change it. But here's where I'm at. I mean, I built the building in 2005, 2006. I constructed the street, I think, in 2010. And believe me, it's not fun mowing the grass and paying property taxes. I'm trying to do something with it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lettner. May I ask Deltec a question then?
Sure.
Please?
Go ahead.
If part or some of this appeal was to pass today, Mr. Tech, do we have similar properties in town that would come forward and then say, well...
Oh, absolutely.
Do you know how many, or?
I would have to say dozens.
Dozens? Okay. Thank you. I yield.
Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. If I can ask a question of the City Attorney's Office. I assume you folks have had an opportunity to review this project, the request for appeal that have gone through. Is there any legal things that we should be aware of in this area? Because I saw some emails going back and forth about some legal questions. Are you aware of that?
You know, I wasn't included on the email chain, so I haven't had a chance to look at those. I don't know if those went to Joel or someone else, but I don't have anything for you today, but that's something I could look at before Monday night.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you. This is good discussion, and you know, we have dozens in the hopper, but they may not all have the history that Mr. Lettner has, and that's kind of where I'm at. But Mr. Lettner, can I ask you a question? Listening to Mr. Tech discuss that if the council Monday night were to approve these exceptions, looking at extending the water main for prior protection and make sure there's a water loop, would that be a deal breaker for you?
Well, let me tell you what my position is on it. Looping infrastructure is not a problem, it's not an issue that only the city of Rapid City faces. I've dealt with this with other utilities. Black Hills Power does it, and Montana Dakota Utilities. I haven't really dealt with it with the telecommunications. I don't know that it affects them as much. When you loop a system, you make it more robust. If there's a break in the system, the water in this case can come from two different directions. If you have an unusually high demand, you can have water coming from two different directions. The difference between the city and Black Hills Power is Black Hills Power identifies areas on their grid where they need loops. And what they do is they say, okay, we want to provide a robust electrical system. This is what it's going to cost for us to do. They go to the Public Utilities Commission, they ask for a rate increase, they get a rate increase, they construct their infrastructure. Never in a project that I have done have I ever been asked to pay for looping, other than with the city. The city doesn't have the dollars, it's a different situation. You talk about water and sewer rates and it becomes a political football. It's completely different than the way the other utilities handle it. My perspective on this is, yes, it does enhance the system, but am I going to be entirely responsible for constructing that to enhance the system? And when you're asking one property owner to do improvements that are to the benefit of the general public, I don't think it's fair until you start breaking out the percentages of the advantage to that particular property owner. I mean, and again, it goes back to, it's hard to break these things out, but you got to look at the fact, look at the storm sewer that I constructed. I constructed a storm sewer that if my entire property was impervious, might use 25% of it. You know, I've taken on the infrastructure issues in that area. You know, bear in mind, I never had to plat this property. You know, if I was having this conversation with the city now and I was in a position to negotiate, I'm like, this is what it's going to take to plat? Fine, not doing it. I'll put storage sheds there. It's zoned correctly, and that's fine, and that's what you're going to get. And that's the bigger problem when we look at infill development in the city and not being sensitive to the fact that some of this stuff exists. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question? It was a little long-winded. Sorry, Jason.
No,
that's my perspective on the water loop. Is it going to benefit me? Sure, but it's also going to benefit the public as a whole. And quite frankly, if the city wants to have a robust water system, it needs to make a lot of loops. I mean, Tim, can you? Yes,
Tim's
no?
my next. Actually, Tim is my next question. Tim, do you want to weigh in on this water loop situation here and our approach to it? Do you want to kind of just make sure we are all understanding of why we would have a water loop here and other places, and how we dealt with this issue previously?
Sure. There's a couple different things. Obviously, we always support looping the water system for everything that's been talked about, the resiliency and redundancy of it and capacity. There are a couple of different things. Depending upon what's constructed on site, dictates the amount of or volume of fire flow for manual firefighting means and or to support a fire suppression system. In most cases, as with the most recent proposed development of Mr. Lettner's property, happened to be residential development in which all of the buildings were fire sprinkler protected, which significantly reduces the required water amount. So at that juncture, the looping, still important for resiliency, may not be as necessary for the volume of water necessary because we reduced that need. So it really becomes probably more of a city policy component, but we do look at it for every job, and it is different for every building as well.
Thank you, Tim, for that. And that's a really good point. I mean, every property is different. So as we look at this, and that Alderwoman Drury, made sure to ask a good question of how many properties are going to be impacted, but every property and every situation is different. You have to take each one as it is, and so this is a tough one, and I think a lot of it will depend on how it's developed, if it is developed, but I think we probably still have a lot more questions come Monday night, is my guess. So, I'll yield.
Thank you. I'd like to step in here. Jim, I have a question for you, Mr. Lettner. Say that we go ahead with your appeal. What would be done with the property? What do you think you're going to do with it?
That's a fair question. It's the south half is zoned commercial, the north half is zoned light industrial. I zoned it light industrial to put storage units. I never moved forward with it. It seemed like every time I turned around, another 500 was being built in Rapid City and whatever. Quite frankly, the most interest that I've had in the property at this point is some kind of a housing solution. I brought something forward last year with a couple of other guys, and quite frankly, I think that the whole platting issue got confused with a TIF that we were applying for to do a workforce housing, and it became a mess. I can't do anything with that property. Here's what I can do with the property if I can't plat it. I can put a fence around it and use it as storage. I can condominiumize it, or I can pull building permits and have some kind of odd conglomeration of buildings on one parcel of land with one legal description.
Okay, you've answered my question. Yeah, that's what I needed to know. I really think that this developer has proceeded in good faith with the city. He did a lot of work. He spent a lot of his own money on promises that were made at a time that, then things changed, and it's a quagmire caused by us and the city, and now this man can't go forward with his development. I'm going to vote for the appeal because I want to get this going. I think that it's an important project for infill, and I want to support it. Thank you. Oh, we have everybody's out of the queue. So I guess that we'll go ahead and take a vote on this. Do we have a motion? Yes, we do not. We do? No, I don't think so. Okay. Motion? Looks like Jason Solomon.
For the sake of moving this along, and some of these kinks can be ironed out for Monday night, but I will move to uphold the appeal of the denied exception request for all the items listed, and I imagine that we'll have more discussion, and I'm willing, by the way, to be flexible and reasonable as more data comes our way, but that's the motion.
Do we have a second? Can I second as chair? I'll second.
You're a voting member.
Okay. Moved by Solomon and seconded by Drew to uphold the appeal. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Aye. And we got a tie, 2-2. So move forward to Monday night without recommendation. Okay? Sure. All right, that moves us on to 17. Appeal of denied exception request by Jim Lettner to waive the requirement to install streetlight conduit along East St. Charles Street, City File 18EX069, continued from June 12, 2018, Public Works Committee meeting. Let's see, we recognize Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may make the same motion on this one, is to send to full council without recommendation and hold the floor. Thank you. Again, I'm in the position of needing a little bit more information. As you can tell, I've asked a lot of people a lot of questions, and I'm not comfortable with any of the, well, most of the answers I'm getting, I'm not comfortable with. So I don't know exactly where I'm going to be at. At this point, I'm looking at both sides, trying to understand both sides. But again, it comes down to, since I'm heavily involved with the CIP program with the City of Rapid City and how that affects our utility funds, how that's going to affect a lot of our other projects that we have in the project list for coming up on CIP, and these are going to have to wait for a long time, at least 5 years, a minimum of 5 years, if not longer. So those are some considerations I have to weigh as well. So do I want to wait that long? I don't know. I don't have that answer yet. So I'll be probably talking to some more people between now and Monday night to come up with a decision. So that's where I'm at this point. So I haven't got a good solid answer for anybody on this. So I'd like to encourage the rest of the committee to send this council without recommendation.
I agree with Councilman Nordstrom. I think if we did take a vote on this, we'd probably end up at the 2-2 and probably be sending it along with that tie and no recommendation. So I can support this motion. So the motion is to send to council without recommendation, and that was moved by Richie Nordstrom and seconded by Becky Drury. All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion carries. Before we adjourn, I want to thank everyone for being here on the committee. It's really hard in the summertime for everyone to show up, and all the staff too. It's just difficult. I think last summer one time we even had a meeting with no quorum. So it's very difficult, and I would like to thank Becky for filling in. And thank you all for taking your time in the summer. It's just a little bit more difficult, and we'll see you all on Monday night. Motion to adjourn? A motion to adjourn and second. All in favor? Aye. And we are adjourned.